The rain had just stopped in Paris, leaving the streets shining like wet glass under the golden glow of the street lamps. The sound of distant traffic mixed with the smell of fresh bread from the bakery down the street. Inside a small, dimly lit apartment on Rue de l'Anjou, Jean was bent over the stove, tasting the onion soup he'd been perfecting all evening. Cooking was his escape. It was the only time he could forget about the bills stacked on the kitchen counter, the leaking faucet in the bathroom, or the fact that his dream, opening his own restaurant, felt like it was drifting further away each year. But tonight wasn't just another night. There was a tension in the air. The front door creaked open, and Elise stepped in. She was breathtaking, tall, with soft blonde curls falling over her shoulders, wearing a deep red silk dress that looked far too expensive for their modest budget. Jean noticed the faint scent of a perfume he didn't recognize. "Elise," he said warmly, "you're early. I thought you had dinner with your friend Camille." She hesitated, setting her clutch on the table without answering. Her eyes wandered around the room, not quite meeting his. "Jean, we need to talk." Jean's hands froze over the soup pot. He turned slowly. "What's wrong?" She took a deep breath, her voice shaky but determined. "I can't do this anymore. I'm tired, Jean, tired of waiting, tired of scraping by. I've given you years, hoping you'd open that restaurant you talk about every night. But," her voice trailed off. Jean felt a cold weight settling in his stomach. "But what?" Her gaze hardened, though her lips trembled. "Antoine can give me the life I deserve." "The life you can't." The name hit him like a punch. Antoine Durand, the son of a real estate tycoon. The man who always showed up at social events with a smug smile and a new luxury car. The man Jean had always suspected looked at Elise a little too long. Jean swallowed. "So, it's him." "Yes." Her voice cracked. "I do love you, Jean, but love doesn't pay for dinners in Monaco or summer trips to Santorini." 27. "I want a family, a real home. You can't even pay for a bigger apartment." He stared at her, feeling the space between them grow into a canyon. This was the same woman who used to laugh with him over cheap wine, sitting on the kitchen floor with bowls of pasta, the same woman who once told him, "As long as we have each other, we're rich." Now, she was walking away for silk sheets and champagne. She stepped closer, placing a soft kiss on his cheek. "I'm sorry," she whispered, tears forming in her eyes, and then she turned toward the door. Jean didn't move. He didn't call her back. He just stood there, gripping the wooden spoon until his knuckles turned white, listening to the sound of her heels clicking down the hallway until they faded away. When the door finally shut, Jean took a deep breath. The soup still simmered on the stove, but the air smelled bitter now. He poured himself a glass of wine, raised it toward the empty chair where Elise used to sit, and made a silent promise. One day, she will see what she gave up. And when she does, it will be too late. The morning after Elise left, Paris looked different. The sunlight didn't feel warm. The cafes on the corner didn't smell inviting. Even the streets seemed colder, harsher. Jean sat at a small table in Le Petit Marché, the cafe where he and Elise had once shared croissants on lazy Sundays. Now, the table felt too big, and the silence between him and his coffee cup felt endless. Everywhere he looked, life seemed to move on without him. Businessmen in tailored suits rushing past. Couples laughing, arm in arm. Tourists taking pictures of buildings he'd seen 1,000 times. But inside Jean's chest, something had changed. The heartbreak was there. Yes, sharp and heavy, but beneath it was a stubborn ember, a voice whispering, "You will not end like this." That day, Jean made a decision. If Elise left because he had nothing, then he would become something. Not just something, everything. The work begins. He started with double shifts at La Belle Maison, the small bistro, where he'd been a sous chef for 3 years. While others went home after service, Jean stayed behind, scrubbing pots, practicing new dishes, and writing in a worn leather notebook full of recipe ideas. The owner, Monsieur Bernard, noticed one night as Jean was testing a new truffle recipe. Bernard leaned against the counter. "You work like a man with something to prove," he said. Jean didn't look up. "Maybe I am." Months passed. He barely saw the city beyond the kitchen walls. His hands grew calloused, his back ached, and his eyes were constantly rimmed with exhaustion. But the dishes he created began to turn heads. Regulars started asking for Chef Jean's special instead of the menu. Food bloggers wrote small reviews, calling his flavors bold yet intimate. Yet Paris still felt too small for his ambition. The gossip of who Elise was dating still reached him through mutual friends, and every time he heard her name, it was like tasting something bitter. The leap to Italy. One evening, after closing, Jean sat alone in the kitchen with Bernard. Over 2 glasses of wine, the old chef said, "If you want to grow, truly grow, go to Italy, work under the masters. Learn the art from the heart of it." Jean hesitated. Moving meant leaving everything, his apartment, his friends, even the streets of Paris he loved. But the thought of staying, of being the man Elise had walked away from, was worse. The next week, he sold almost everything he owned, with a small suitcase, a box of kitchen knives, and 1,200 euros to his name. He boarded a train to Milan. A new beginning in Milan. Jean found work at a family-owned Trattoria Rossi, tucked away in a cobblestone alley. It was nothing like the polished bistros of Paris. Here, the air was thick with garlic and fresh basil, the walls lined with old wine bottles, and the kitchen alive with laughter and arguments in rapid Italian. Jean didn't understand much at first, but food was its own language. He learned to roll pasta by hand, to use olive oil like liquid gold, to respect simplicity over show. The Rossi family took him in like one of their own, but Jean never forgot why he was there. Every night, before he slept, he opened his leather notebook and wrote down a new recipe idea, a step closer to the restaurant he would one day open. And in the quiet of his small Milan apartment, he would whisper to himself, "One day, Elise will see me again, and she won't recognize the man I've become." 3 years passed in the blink of an eye. Milan had shaped Jean into someone entirely new, not just a better chef, but a man who carried himself with quiet confidence. His once slouched shoulders now stood tall, his movements in the kitchen sharp and decisive. The trattoria had become more than just a job. It was a crucible. He had burned dishes, cut his hands, stayed up until dawn experimenting with sauces, but every mistake was a lesson, and every success was another step toward his dream. The turning point. One rainy afternoon, a well-dressed man entered Trattoria Rossi. His name was Alessandro Moretti, a wealthy hotel owner known for spotting culinary talent. Jean served him his signature wild mushroom tagliatelle with black truffle. Moretti took one bite, set down his fork, and said, "You don't belong in a small kitchen like this. You belong in the spotlight." The offer came quickly. The head chef position at La Fiora, a luxury rooftop restaurant overlooking the Milan skyline. It was the kind of place where reservations were booked months in advance, and the wine list was longer than the menu. Jean accepted without hesitation. From chef to star, La Fiora was nothing like the warm chaos of Trattoria Rossi. Here, every plate was a work of art, every garnish placed with surgical precision. Critics began writing about Jean's fearless flavor combinations and emotional storytelling through food. Food magazines across Europe started calling him the Parisian Phoenix, the man who rose from heartbreak to culinary greatness. By his second year at La Fiora, he was invited to cook at international food festivals in London, Barcelona, and Dubai. He shook hands with celebrities, cooked for royalty, and was offered partnerships to open his own restaurants. The invitation then came the night that changed everything. After a charity gala in Rome, a woman approached him backstage. She was an event planner, organizing a high-profile wedding for an elite Parisian couple. "They specifically requested you to design the menu," she said with a smile. "The bride has heard of your work and insisted." When Jean saw the name on the invitation, his chest tightened. Elise, the girl who once left him for a man with a penthouse, was marrying that same man, Antoine Durand, and she wanted him, the man she discarded, to cook at her wedding. The decision that night, Jean sat in his Milan apartment, staring at the wedding invitation under the soft glow of the lamp. His fingers traced the embossed letters. He could still remember the way she had looked at him the night she left, pity mixed with impatience. Now, fate had handed him a stage. He smiled, a slow, knowing smile. "All right, Elise," he murmured. "Let's see how rich your taste really is." The Château de Montclair sat like a crown on the hills outside Paris, a sprawling estate with marble columns, crystal chandeliers, and fountains that sparkled under the summer sun. The air smelled of roses, champagne, and money. Jean arrived early that morning, dressed not in the crisp white jacket of a kitchen chef, but in a tailored black chef's coat with his name embroidered in gold. His knives were polished to a mirror shine, laid neatly in a leather roll. Inside the grand ballroom, the staff bustled about, placing flowers on tables and polishing silverware. Jean took his place in the kitchen, a space nearly the size of his first Paris apartment, and began overseeing the preparations. The first glimpse around noon, he heard laughter echoing down the marble hallway. Turning his head, he saw her. Elise. She wore an ivory gown that clung to her like a secret, her hair swept into an elegant twist. She was radiant, but there was something in her eyes he hadn't seen before. A flicker, a shadow. For a moment, their eyes met. The world seemed to shrink to that single instant. She froze, recognition dawning across her face. "Jean," she whispered, almost breathless. He smiled politely, as if greeting a stranger. "Madame Durand," her smile faltered. She didn't expect indifference. Cooking for the enemy, the menu he had designed was exquisite. Seared scallops with saffron cream, slow-roasted lamb with rosemary, just chocolate soufflé with raspberry. Callous, every dish was a masterpiece. But there was something else, something Elise didn't know. Jean had chosen each flavor with purpose, each pairing a subtle echo of the meals they had once shared together in their tiny Paris apartment. With every bite she would take that night, memories would come rushing back, not as sweetness, but as a reminder of what she had thrown away. The moment before the feast, just before service began, Jean stepped into the garden for fresh air. He found Elise there, away from the crowd, staring at the horizon. "Why didn't you tell me it was you?" she asked softly. "Would it have changed anything?" He replied. She hesitated. You look different, successful, happier. Jean studied her face. Happiness isn't about money, Elise. It's about knowing your worth. Something I had to learn without you. Before she could respond, a waiter called him back to the kitchen. Dinner service had begun. The first bite when the first course was served. Jean stayed in the shadows, watching from a distance. He saw Elise lift her fork, taste the scallops, and pause. Her eyes closed for a fraction of a second. He knew exactly what she was remembering the night they made a similar disagent together in that cramped little kitchen. Years ago she opened her eyes and glanced around the room until they found him again. But this time, her gaze wasn't pride or admiration. It was regret. The ballroom glittered under 100 chandeliers as the final course was served. Jean's signature chocolate soufflé, airy and rich, with a drizzle of raspberry shaped like a delicate heart. Whispers of praise floated through the tables. Guests marveled at the flavors, the presentation, the skill, but Jean's eyes were fixed on only one person, the confrontation after the meal. Elise approached him in a quiet hallway, away from the laughter and music. She looked different now, her smile forced, her eyes glassy. Jean, she began, her voice trembling. I didn't know you had become this everything I thought you couldn't be. He remained still, his expression unreadable. And yet, you didn't stay to see it happen. Her lips parted, but no words came. Finally, she whispered, I made a mistake. The King's reply was calm, almost gentle. No, Elise, you made a choice, and choices have a way of sticking with us. She glanced toward the ballroom where Antoine laughed with his business partners, his arm draped around a glass of champagne instead of her shoulders. The shadow in her eyes deepened. You're happier now? She asked quietly. Jean smiled faintly. I was happy the day I realized I didn't need you to be complete. Success was just the proof. The final goodbye. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. If I could go back, but you can't, Jean interrupted. His tone, neither cruel nor kind, just final. And that's the thing about regret. It lingers, but it doesn't change the past. He walked away without looking back, his black chef's coat catching the warm light from the chandeliers. Elise stood there, alone, holding on to the taste of the soufflé and the bitter truth it carried. Epilogue. Months later, La Fiora opened its Paris branch with Jean as owner and head chef. The restaurant became an overnight sensation. Reservations booked for months ahead. In the crowd on opening night, a familiar face appeared. Not Elise, but one of her friends from the wedding. She congratulated Jean, took a photo with him, and left. Somewhere in the city, Jean knew Elise would see that photo, and she would remember the man she left, who had become everything she once said he couldn't be. This ending gives viewers emotional closure, poetic justice, and a sense of triumph which will make them rewatch and share.